Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Jason Gary and I work for ScriptLogic. The title of our webinar is 4 Tactics for Better Software License Management, and basically it's about making asset management less painful. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First, we're going to be sharing some links with you on some of the slides where Greg will be talking. And these are on a website that ScriptLogic produces called SMBIT Simplified. So you'll see those bit.ly links, and if you can't write them down during the presentation, that's okay because we'll email them to you after the event. We are recording this event, so if you can't stay for the entire time or if you'd like to share it with any of your coworkers, we'll email you a link to the recording early next week. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please don't hesitate to enter them into the box provided in the GoToWebinar console, and we'll get to, or try to get to, all of those at the end of the presentation. And last but not least, we will be giving away an iPad 2 to one lucky attendee just in time for the holidays. So we're going to do this at the end of the presentation and make sure that you are still here because you have to be present to win. So good luck to you guys, and we'll get started now. So first, a little about the speakers. Greg Shields is Senior Partner and Principal Technologist with Concentrated Technology. He's written for TechNet Magazine, Redmond Magazine, Real-Time Publishers. He's spoken at conferences like TechEd and VMworld. He is a Microsoft MVP and a VMware vExpert. Say hi, Greg.
Hi, Greg.
And again, my name is Jason. I joined ScriptLogic a little over 2 years ago, and currently I'm the Director of Product Marketing, and my whole reason for living is to promote ScriptLogic products and to evangelize them. So I want to make you love our products as much as I do.
That is an impressive reason for living.
Isn't it, though? So a little bit about ScriptLogic. If you haven't been acquainted with us in the past, we were founded in 2000, so we've been around for almost 12 years now. And we focus on 4 key areas of Windows management: desktop management, help desk management, server management, and Active Directory management. We have over 30,000 customers worldwide, and they range in size from the little SMB companies all the way up to the Fortune 100. And we are located here in Boca Raton, Florida, which right now is mostly sunny and in the 70s. So I feel bad for anyone up north who's dealing with freezing weather or snow. Try not to rub that in too much. We're a subsidiary of Quest Software, and we have been since 2007. What does that mean? That means we're part of the Quest Software family, and Quest, if you know them, is one of the largest Microsoft ISVs in the world, and we get to be part of that, but we still develop and support our own software as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
It's sunny, and I think it's a high of 33 here in beautiful, sunny Denver, Colorado.
Nice.
I notice every time we start these presentations, every person from ScriptLogic that does a webinar always refers to how wonderful the temperature is in Boca Raton.
Well, there's a reason we live here.
Indeed. Thanks to all of you for spending some time to talk with us about software license management. I got to tell you, software license management has got to be one of the most painful activities, really. And I don't know. It says it right there on the top of the slide. Managing licenses sucks. And it does because this is this activity that, well, there's not a lot of stuff out there, right? There's not a lot of tools that are available for you natively. And I'm going to show you some of the potential tools that you might potentially use. And this is based off of trying to find anything that could be useful out of the native tool set. But there's just not that much there. And the penalties for not being successful with software license management are potentially huge. I mean, your environment, your business, your company could have some pretty significant, financial problems if you end up not doing a good job with your license management. And although people get fined for license management, most businesses, really are trying to do their due diligence as it relates to software license management. And it's not so much the fines I think that a lot of people are worried about, as much as realizing inadvertently that you've missed a bunch of licenses, and then in order to bring yourself up to true, you've got to go and spend a bunch of money just to go buy those licenses that you just kind of totally forgot about. And so this activity is really plain awful simply because those licenses are expensive. And the licenses, the software that your users profess that they need, is not always the software that they actually ever use. You you know this story, right? I will name a primary offender, Microsoft Project. And it happens in all the environments pretty much that I have a chance to walk into. You talk to people who profess that they need Microsoft Project in order to do their job, but if you actually were to look at how many minutes a week or minutes a month they use a tool like that, it's probably not that much. And solutions like that, you're spending extra money for licenses that people just aren't using. If you fail with this activity, you've either overbought or you've got to buy a bunch of licenses that weren't part of your budget in the first place. So not doing a good job here can be a real impact on the bottom end dollars. It could mean fines, although those tend not to come as often as just simply truing yourself back up. And that bottom bullet point down there is most important, that the native tools, so the things that are built directly into Windows to actually manage licenses are almost laughable in what they can't do. So let's talk about managing licenses. Okay, so let's talk about really what the unfortunate reality is as it relates to licenses. That is that the native tools by themselves just simply do not provide you with the types of instrumentation, the types of data that you're looking for. Now, what's interesting is that the native tools includes PowerShell. It includes digging into Windows Management Instrumentation, WMI. It includes the tools in the GUI as well. And in fact, what you'll find is that the mechanisms by which you will go to sleuth around onto a computer to find what software is actually there, short of clicking on a start button, those mechanisms are not always consistently applied. In fact, there are some pieces of software that will register themselves, for example, in WMI, but won't register themselves into the registry. There are even further ones that might register themselves in add remove programs, but don't do it in either of the other locations. And so you have to kind of really do some very deep level sleuthing to try to figure out what the breadcrumbs, the trail of breadcrumbs is, to find what pieces of software actually exist on your systems today. As Jason mentioned, I'm going to talk about a couple of specific points or a couple of specific tools that you can use right out of the box. But I also, at the same time, want to give you a feel for why they're probably not going to solve your problem entirely. All of these, as Jason said, don't you go to the next slide there, all of these, as Jason said, are going to be available at scriptlogic.com/SMBIT. The ScriptLogic, Jason and the other ScriptLogic people have asked myself and Don Jones, Avril Salter, Jeff Hicks, and Jeremy Moskowitz to put together some nice SMB-friendly just tips and tricks on various different ways that you can go about managing your systems. And these don't have anything to do with ScriptLogic software. It's just better ways for you to manage your environment. And all of these little tricks come from that website, scriptlogic.com/SMBIT. So the first activity in license management, at least as I see it, is really discovery. Right? You've got to go across all of the machines that make up your network and figure out what's on those computers. And that's not really an easy activity. I can remember a period not long ago where the process of doing software discovery involved running around with a clipboard and a piece of paper and a pencil and taking a look at add remove programs, or programs and features now these days, and seeing what was installed on the computer. That's a horribly, horribly inefficient solution because you got to run around. You've got to, with pencil and paper or with tablet device, mark down which machines have which stuff. And thankfully, most of these characteristics are now addressable through various remote solutions. Interestingly enough, the information that actually gathers program data inside of WMI for populating this programs and features view here is not actually a really great view with which to capture that information from inside of WMI. In fact, one of the first places you may look in order to do this discovery is actually in the registry. If you look, and it's kind of tiny down there in the bottom of this screenshot here, you can see in the location HKey local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows, current version, and then uninstall. The subkeys at this location are all of the different, or many of the different applications that have been installed to this computer. As you can see, I'm taking a look here in this screenshot at one of the subkeys here, which is just this long GUID that relates to the application called 7-zip, which, if you're familiar with 7-zip, it's like WinZip. Now, what this location does is it does provide for me a little bit of information about that piece of software. I can get my display name. I can get some various stuff here too, the help about information, the language, the install source, things like that. I can get the uninstall string if I wanted to automate the uninstallation of this piece of software. Now, what's interesting, however, is that, as I mentioned before, not every piece of software actually registers information in this uninstalled key. A lot of them do, but not all of them do. And so you may have to go about checking to the registry, either manually here using the registry editor or some other command line tool. Alternatively, you may also want to take a look at WMI. Many applications that do not register themselves in the registry may register themselves inside of WMI, and specifically in the Win32 product class. So the PowerShell command that you would use to actually query Win32 product is gwmi, or get WMI object, Win32_project. And here's what the result looks like. So I ran this off of my computer here locally, and then snapped the screenshot and put it in this slide. Running gwmi Win32 product gives you just this long list, all the items just fly by, of the pieces of software that have been registered into WMI that are installed onto this computer. So gwmi Win32 product gets you everything that's installed locally. Now that really does leave no better solution than walking around with a piece of paper and a pen, because you would have to go to a local computer in order to support this. Now, thankfully, PowerShell includes the support for remoting other computers and remoting the WMI store on other computers. See, and it also includes the ability to take that information and then wrap it into some sort of text file. So how might this work? Okay, so the bottom PowerShell command down here is one that you can actually read more about in the bottom right-hand link there, that bit.ly link on the bottom. But what I've done is taken gwmi Win32 product, and I've told it to reference a list of computers using the dash computer name variable, or the dash computer name piece down here. You'll notice that after dash computer name, the parameter there, I'm actually telling the computer name parameter to get its information from a file called computers.txt. So running get content against that computer list will identify all the content that's inside of that text file. Now, if that text file, computers.txt, actually includes a list of computer names, one computer name per line, well, then what this will do is actually go through each computer name one by one and ask its WMI for the contents of Win32 product. The last piece of this is, for each computer that I end up gathering information from, well, I want to actually output the contents of that. I want to output whatever results I get from WMI into some sort of additional text file. And I've done some really interesting trickery here that allows me to output the contents of that computer's Win32 product class into a file name that equals whatever its host name is. On the server, share1/share. So kind of complex here, and really not a perfect solution, because what you're going to end up with is a whole series of text files that you've got to then go and index. But what this does is give you at least some rudimentary mechanism using PowerShell in order to query remote WMI on different computers and then pipe those results into a series of text files. Now, Jason, I'm sure that ScriptLogic probably has some solutions that might make this a little easier.
You know, you're very intuitive, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, you know, Greg just went over all these methods that you can use to try to find software, and you have to go in so many different locations because not all software is registered in the registry or add remove programs, and trying to grab it from WMI means that you've got to consolidate the data so you're not trying to read the screen of information that's flying by and outputting that to text files, and it's all very manual. So ScriptLogic offers a product called Asset Manager that can automate all of this for you. And basically it does the same processes that Greg just outlined, but it does them in a manner where it can consolidate all of that information and then bring it into a single console and display that for you. And I'll show that to you in a second. But in addition to that, if you're running mixed environments, so if you have users that are accessing published desktops, published applications, if you're using virtual servers, you've got to be able to track the software running on those environments as well. And one thing Asset Manager can do very well is identify software in physical environments and virtual environments. There are plugins for Citrix, for XenApp, etc. So you're not going to miss out on those different environments when you're trying to gather a complete list of software in your environment. Now, if you also use System Center, there is a version of Asset Manager that can integrate with that so that you're not having overlapping functionality, and you can use System Center to inventory all of that software and deliver that into Asset Manager and still use the console and all of the reporting and everything to look at all the software you have installed. Now, if you use Asset Manager on its own, you're actually going to deploy and install a small client on each device you want to collect information from. And this actually works very well because if you have a lot of remote employees or a lot of locations that you have offices, it can still gather and deliver all of that data back to the main server. So now that we've got that, I want to show you a little bit about Asset Manager and kind of show you some of the discovering. So Greg, can you see Asset Manager up on my screen?
Yep, now I can.
Okay, perfect. So just a quick intro to Asset Manager. It is a web-based console, so you can launch it in Internet Explorer or any browser that you're using. It can allow multiple administrators to be logged in at the same time. This is a dashboard where it's going to give you some at-a-glance views of items you may need to take care of, critical exceptions like people who aren't licensed or licenses that aren't activated. It can tell you if people have not been using software in the last 30, 90 days, etc. Just kind of a quick snapshot view. But when we're going through Asset Manager, we can very quickly see that we're pulling in all of our users in our environment. So we can integrate with Active Directory and tell who the users are, what environment or OU they're in, what location they're in, etc. So we have a full catalog of what users are using our software. And then we can also go into our software section and look at all of the software that's been discovered. We can look at our workstations and look at what hardware assets we have, not just software, which we're focusing on in this webcast, but also what hardware assets we have, what virtual assets we have. So again, if you're running a lot of virtual servers, we can tell what virtual environments that you have and track those as well. And then we'll get into this later, but you need to be able to tie your hardware and your software assets back to vendors and back to contracts. So if you have service agreements, if you have warranties, if you have leases, you want to be able to track all that information. And then obviously you want to be able to report on this as well. So you can see here in my small environment that I'm using that we've gone and discovered a bunch of software. So you can see we've got some Adobe software, Crystal Reports, GoToMeeting, Java, then we get into the Microsoft software as well. So we're not looking at just Microsoft software, but all of these third-party pieces of software as well. And we're looking at things like the title of the software, the version, the manufacturer. There are some groups that Asset Manager uses that are either automatically applied by Asset Manager, or you can create your own groups like this here. We can create a group for approved apps or restricted apps or just Adobe products or products only created by Quest Software. And then we can also look at the number of workstations that the software is installed on, the number of users who are using that software, and then most importantly as well, we can tell when this software was last used. And Greg kind of mentioned that. You could be over-licensed on project, but you don't know that unless you know how often people are using that software. And in Asset Manager, we can log the last time people have actually used those licenses and figure out, hey, I've bought 50 licenses of project, but I've only got 15 people using it. And at a couple $100 a pop, I could apply that money to other software or other investments in IT. And we can look at this very easily here in the software section, but if I go down to the report section, I can run some application reports very quickly that are going to show me all the software that's installed in my environment, and I can export that report, I can print it, I can save it and share that around and have kind of a master file of all the software that we've got installed in our environment. And that's kind of some of the basic functionality that allows us to kind of discover software here in Asset Manager. And I'll turn that back over to you now, Greg.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the ways that people actually end up finding software also. So we talked about running around with a clipboard. We talked about querying WMI. We talked about querying the registry also in an uninstall key. And one of the other techniques that some people use in order just to find software is they recognize that a piece of software tends to get installed into a pretty consistent location on their computer. And if they can find where the exes are, and if there is a presence of different exes on different computers, well, that can help create a trail of breadcrumbs to ultimately get people towards what a piece of software is. The goal here is kind of mapping the applications you find with the licenses that you have. And this is actually something that's just really not well instrumented inside of Windows. And the very best thing that I think we have is just an extended view of what each piece of software registers into WMI. And that's the PowerShell command here. That's gathered via the PowerShell command that you're taking a look here in the second bullet on the screen. So using the command get WMI object or GWMI, again, I'm taking a look at Win32_product, but this time I'm actually just looking at one of the specific pieces of software that an earlier query may have found on this computer. In this case, it's the Adobe Air product. What I'm doing here is piping the results into the where object command and then pulling out where we want to look at the Adobe Air application. The last piece here is to pipe that into filter list and then filter list with the star command, because what I'm looking for is some greater sense of the data that gets captured about each specific application. So this is all of the different information inside of WMI that for the Adobe Air application has gotten populated into that WMI store. And you can see here that Adobe Air, we get the version number, we have some information about where it's installed to, the install location. We've got the GUID there. We have the install source information there. We have, let's see, the local package information in package cache. We know who the vendor is, and then we can kind of, again, get a little bit of better information about how we might map what this application is to whatever licenses that we have. The problem here, and I think this sort of goes without saying, is that this process really still does nothing towards actually mapping the applications you have with the licenses you have. And as I said kind of at the beginning of this, Windows does not do a very good job of this. So really, this is kind of the best, I think, out of the native tools that you can get in terms of creating that mapping between application and license. Jason?
Yeah, so when you're looking at that and you're looking at what we offer in terms of Asset Manager, there's a couple of things that we can do to track licenses, to track those licenses back to the contracts and the vendors. So in Asset Manager, you can store your vendor data that you're using these vendors to purchase hardware and software from. You can enter those agreements that you've made, whether they're purchase agreements, leases, service contracts, etc. And then you can track the dates of when those agreements expire so that you can get notification of, okay, this lease is expiring, so I have to decommission this piece of hardware, or our warranty's running out, or our service contract's running out, and that way it's not coming up as a surprise. The same for software licenses. If you're buying a license that includes support, you want to make sure that you continue that support, and you want to get notified of when that support expires. Now, the other thing being, it's great if you can go out there and find all this software. Like Greg mentioned, you can see the vendor, you can see the name of the software, but it can be a manual process to try to map all that back. So Asset Manager actually uses what we call a software pattern identification database, or informally known as software DNA. And there's over 200,000 software packages included in this database. That includes bundles, additions, packages, Adobe Creative Suite versus just Photoshop, Windows Office, professional versus enterprise versus standard. And it can tell the difference between those different licenses and different groups and bundles, so that you know that if you have employees that actually need things like Access or Project or Publisher, that they're the ones getting the Professional Plus version of Office versus the people who only need Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook, and they're only getting the standard version, and that's going to help save you on your license cost. And with Asset Manager and this whole database, it will automatically identify all these different types of software for you, automatically 85% of the time. And if you have software that you're regularly using, whether it's homegrown software or software that's not in the database, you can actually submit that to us, and we can get that added to the database for you, so in the future it gets recognized automatically. So let me go back to Asset Manager and kind of show you some of the pieces of the software that support what I was just talking about. So first, let's go over to the agreements and kind of look at how we're going to track our agreements back to our software. So if we go here and open up our Photoshop agreement, I'll show you some of the information that we're tracking. So we can track what kind of asset this is, whether it's software or hardware. We can enter our agreement number in there, the title of the contract, what kind of contract is this? Is it a purchase? Is it a lease, etc. What vendor or partner were we using to buy the software from? When did we execute the agreement, or when does it start? You can add custom fields like cost center, budget year, whatever you need for your business to track those things back to. And then we've got our dates here as well. So again, if I know my contract ends June of next year, I want to get notified 90, 60, and 30 days out so I can start my negotiations with Adobe again to buy new licenses, because my graphics team needs the latest and greatest. Or if my support's ending, I want to make sure that my support continues. So we want to make sure that we're looking at those things, and then we're also wanting to tie that back to licenses. So if we go over to software, and then we click on Photoshop here, we go back to our licenses, and we want to make sure that we've got all that information inputted. So when I look at my license for Adobe Photoshop, I can tie that back to that agreement I just showed you, which is number 231, our Adobe Photoshop CS5 agreement. I've got the number of licenses that we're licensed for, and then I've got all the other information here, the vendor, the dates, the key that we're using to do the install. So we've got all of that in one place. So if someone accidentally throws away that Photoshop box or gets misplaced, you're not hunting around for a key. You've got it right here, and you can go right into Asset Manager to look for that. And that's how we're kind of putting these pieces together. And that also will help us in the future when we're trying to figure out what we're spending in terms of licenses and what potentially we're wasting when we're not using some of those licenses. Now if we go back and we look at our software identification, I'm going to go into administration here and setup and show you some of this, what we have in terms of software. We're looking at things like Office. So I've got a little view here where I've looked at Office, and in my environment I have both Standard Edition and Professional Plus. And you'll notice if I click in here and look at what applications are included in Standard Edition, that's only Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook. So the people who need those pieces of software should be the only ones using Standard. And for those who need applications like Access or Publisher, then they need Professional Plus. And anyone who is not using those two applications should not be using Professional Plus. And if they are, that means I'm wasting that more expensive license on them that I could be using elsewhere. So you can see here I've got them installed on one workstation each. I've got them actively metered. I've got no users on Standard Edition who have used this software yet, but I do have someone using the Professional Plus version. So I can tell very quickly whether this license is being used or not, and then I can reallocate them as needed, or when I go to renegotiate my license, I can tell Microsoft I don't need as many Professional Plus licenses, I need to buy more Standard Edition licenses, and I'm going to save some money. So that's basically what I wanted to cover under identification and tracking back to vendors, and I'll turn it back over to you, Greg.
That's pretty impressive stuff, honestly. So, okay, so now we've gone through and identified, we've discovered the stuff that we have, and we've tracked the stuff that we have to the pieces of paper that give us the privilege to use that stuff. You know, the third activity, honestly, is really managing and proactively managing what kinds of software are used on the network. And interestingly enough, this is an activity that is not often done in a lot of environments today, and it's understandable because the tools with which to create an environment of approved execution have for a very long time been very difficult to work with. The native tools back in Windows XP were called software restriction policies. In Windows 7, we have the new App Locker feature, which works with certain versions of Windows 7. And App Locker, what the intention of App Locker is to create this environment of, like what I say here, approved execution, where you as an IT organization say, we are going to deny all software from executing, except for the pieces of software that we have specifically approved for execution. And in concept, this is a really, really great thing, because if you set a global deny for all pieces of software, and then piece of software by piece of software, instance by instance, then define what it is that you want to approve, well, then you know that the only pieces of software that are actually functioning in your organization are those that you have specifically tested and validated and you know you have the licenses for and are ready to go. As you can see here on the screen, this is one of the properties views for App Locker, where we've set up executable rules to enforce and also Windows installer rules to enforce as well. What is also important is in recognizing that you have to go through the management tasks once you've turned on enforcing these rules of really dealing with the pieces of software that you need. On the next slide here, you can see that creating a lot of these rules is unfortunately with App Locker really, really, really ridiculously challenging. And I think I say here challenging to the point of absurdity. Whereas App Locker is a great solution on paper, even its automations remain insufficient because the tools that you have with which to manage App Locker are probably insufficient for all but the most simple of application environments. You will have to go through and identify what the applications are that you need to run, and then with that information, maintain that and manage that over a period of time. It's a great idea, it's a great concept, and if you're the type of person that really can keep a really good organization to your environment, then it's something that you may want to consider. But for the rest of us, managing software is something that really requires a proactive approach, whereas App Locker may not actually support that in the ways that you need to. Jason?
Yeah, so then again we come back to, what can ScriptLogic offer to solve this problem? How are you going to control the applications that are in your environment and, one, prevent malicious applications like malware, spyware from infiltrating, and keep people from running software that they're not licensed for? And there's a couple of ways, one of which in Asset Manager is you can create groups of software that are approved. You can create a custom group for approved software, a group for restricted software, and you can track and report on that. And there's some limited functionality in Asset Manager where we can actively meter a user and prevent them from launching a specific piece of software. But an even better tool for this is a product that we offer called Privilege Authority, and this is actually a free tool. It doesn't cost anything to use. There's a community of people out there that are actively using this product and posting their rules that they create for allowing and denying products. And the great thing about Privilege Authority is that you can not only say a product is absolutely denied or absolutely allowed, but you can select that there are approved applications for specific people in your organization. For example, only marketing should be running Adobe Acrobat Pro. So we're going to allow them to automatically run any updates on their own, and we're going to deny that to everyone else. Nobody else should be able to run those Adobe updates. Or our accounting department has to use this very specific piece of accounting software, so we're going to allow them to run that software, but we're going to deny everyone else from running it, and that's going to help us comply with our licensing. That's going to help us prevent people from doing upgrades that they aren't authorized to do and installing software they aren't authorized to install. And if you want to check out Privilege Authority, you can actually go to scriptlogic.com/PA, and you can go download that free tool just with your email address, or you can download the professional version, which includes even more features to allow you to target rules and whatnot. But I'm actually going to show you an asset manager right now where you can set up some of those groups where you can track approved and restricted software. So I'm going to go back into our software and look at groups specifically. Now, some of these groups are created automatically by Asset Manager, and this kind of helps us very quickly identify software, whether it's commercial software, whether it's trial software, freeware, whether this software is part of a bundled package, etc. But down here you can see that we also have our approved group, our restricted group, and this can track software that I've approved. This can also track software that I've restricted, and I can run reports on this. So my approved software includes Adobe products. My restricted software could include software that may not run well on our network or could prove a security risk. And then I can go into our reporting section and then run those reports to figure out what workstations, what users, etc. have that software installed or running that software, etc. And I can also create groups for even just my software that we need to run as a business. So for example, we have a bunch of pieces of software we run internally that are created by Quest. And I want to make sure that I've got all of that software in the approved group and we're not restricting any access to that. And that's pretty much what I wanted to show you on this management section, and we'll take it back over to Greg to talk about tracking.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, and Jason, you could almost point out the fact that the limitations that are in group policy, the same kind of itchiness that we have in group policy are the same kind of itchiness that people would have inside of an app blocker installation. You know, the challenge in getting the right policies targeted to the right people, I think, is one of the more difficult things. And that's a group policy thing,
yeah,
more so than I think an app blocker thing. Number 4 here, tracking. So, all right, so we have discovered what we need. We have linked, or we've discovered what we have. We've linked what we have to what are the things that we have permission to use and what are the things we've purchased. We've brought that whole environment under control, under proactive control as it relates to managing software. Now, the last task here is really tracking the use of software. And you know, I mentioned that people aren't really doing proactive management. I think that the number of people doing proactive tracking is about equal. Yet tracking is, in many ways, one of the most important tasks that you can accomplish if your goal is in reducing the number of licenses that you have outstanding. So what is tracking? Right? Tracking is, let's take a look at how much our users are actually using the software that they have. Okay, where the application is located, how many users are actually using it, which users maybe used it for a project or for a period of time and aren't using it anymore, so which users could I pull the application back from, how often is that application being used? You know, have I gone and purchased an application that in reality people are not really using at all? And in fact, it's as a funny aside here as it relates to this 4th bullet here, a lot of environments, and I see this happening in environments everywhere, where there are these ancient software packages and probably some servers that are associated with these ancient software packages. And you walk in to the environment as an outside consultant and you say, hey, how many applications do you have under management? And they say, well, we have 1,200 applications under management. And many of those are applications that the IT organization still considers to be under management. But the actual amount of time, the number of minutes a month that application is being used is probably something that you can count on one hand, if at all. So tracking the software utilization can be fundamentally helpful for organizations that have all this extra legacy stuff that they just need a quantitative verification that people aren't really actually using it anymore. And then lastly down here is also the hosting model, right? So if people are using this, does it make sense to put it on their desktop? Or does it make sense to put it, for example, up on a terminal server, remote desktop server somewhere, maybe in a VDI environment? So all of these are kind of the questions that you should be asking yourselves in terms of what kinds of benefits might you get out of metering? Now, my job here is to tell you, all right, well, how would you actually go about doing metering with inside the Windows operating system? And as you can imagine, doing so inside the Windows operating system is also fairly challenging. The mechanisms which to manage how many minutes a day and to catalog and to monitor how many minutes a day that application is actually executing is something that requires a whole host of exposure, whether it be PowerShell or you might even have to create your own agent to make this work. I did, for one of the other articles for the SMB IT site, down there in the bottom right, I did put together the world's most rudimentary software metering tool in existence, which is a single PowerShell command that you can see here on the screen. So what does this PowerShell do? The very first thing it does is it runs get process. And for each of the processes that it finds inside of get process, it goes and figures out some information about that process. So it takes a look at the start time of the process. And from that start time, it does some fancy calculations to figure out how many minutes have elapsed from the time that the application started, so the time that the person clicked on Microsoft Project, between then and now. And with that information, it then writes out the results of that to some sort of text file by process name and then by the number of minutes that have elapsed. Now what you get out of that is a screen that looks somewhat like this. Kind of nasty, but what it can tell me is that for all of these processes that are running on this computer, obviously except for the one that I've got an interesting error message on, for all of these other processes, how many minutes have these processes actually been functioning on that computer? As you can see here, what's the fourth from the bottom there? WinWords been running for 14 minutes. The VMware processes have been running for about 37 minutes there. And so if I ran this, potentially, and then captured the results, and then maybe compared the results over a period of time via some log file, I could, with PowerShell alone, gather some interesting information about how many minutes a day people are using these applications. Again, the application has to be running for it to function with a tool like this. So I can't, if I miss it when I execute this command, if I don't actually, if the user happens to turn off the application before I execute the command, I'm not going to find any information. But if it's still running, I can use PowerShell and maybe something similar to this to gather that monitoring and metering information. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, well, there's definitely an easier way to do it using Asset Manager. Definitely doesn't require your own coding or creating log files, but you can accomplish much the same. So there's two different kinds of metering, really, that we're dealing with. It's either passive software metering, which is where we're just going to record what's going on, which I think you were talking about in your PowerShell script, and we're going to log every time a piece of software is opened and closed, but not do anything about it. And then there's active metering, which means that if you have a license that it allows you to run 5 users concurrently, and all of those users are on, and then user number 6 tries to launch the software, we'll actually prevent them, Asset Manager will prevent them from launching that software. So we're actively restricting anyone outside the license from running the software. And we also get some benefit out of that through this Active Directory integration. For example, if I have 20 licenses for Photoshop, and 10 of those are allocated to my Pittsburgh office where a lot of my graphics designers are, but I find that 15 computers have Photoshop installed, then I know, even though I don't have more than 20 licenses throughout my business, that Pittsburgh is over licensed, and I need to take 5 licenses away from that and move it to other locations in the company. Some people are missing their Photoshop licenses. So it's important to be able to tie that Active Directory information in there. And then it's really important to be able to report on what you found. So it's one thing to be able to run a report saying what software you have installed, but it's a completely different thing to be able to run a report that says, yes, I have it installed, but how many of those machines that software is installed on are not the machines that are supposed to have the license. So then you very quickly see how many people have a piece of software that aren't supposed to have it, and then going back to, again, being over-licensed, how many people have it licensed, but haven't launched it in the last 30, 60, 90 days. So I'll go over to Asset Manager here and kind of show you what that looks like. So if I go back to setup and go back to our software, And again, I look at Photoshop down here. This is where we're setting up our metering. So again, you see the usual stuff like what software is it, what version, what manufacturer, what platform are we on? Are we on Windows or Mac? Yes, we can discover, we can track, we can meter software on Mac as well. So if you have any questions about, what about my 5 Mac computers that my artists are using? Yes, we can discover and manage software on Macs as well. And then below that is where we're going to look at our metering. So we can have nothing in place, which means we won't report on the usage. We can have passive metering in place where we're going to report on the people who are using the software. And then we've got our active metering, and that's done in 2 ways. We have per user and per device, and that's going to allow us to actively restrict people. So again, if you're only licensed for 5 concurrent users and number 6 gets on there, we can prevent number 6 from actually launching that software. Now, if I want to report on this, I can do that, and I can do that through an application report where I can, again, look at software that's installed, but I can also look at software that's not installed. So going back to security, if I know that I have to apply an update to Acrobat Reader that addresses a serious security flaw, I've got to figure out what machines still don't have that patch applied, and I can run very quickly and do a search, and I could filter the search even further based on only Reader and find out what machines do not have software installed. I can also look at usage by workstation, I can look at usage by user, and I can also look at concurrent user to see how many times have I been meeting the concurrency. Am I regularly running over what I've been licensed for, so do I need to buy more license, or am I never reaching that 5 concurrency and am I over licensed? But this is great and all to tell you what's installed and not installed, but it's not going to tell you what's being licensed and what's not being used. And for that, we can run down to our compliance reports. Now, again, most people aren't terribly worried about being fined because not a lot of audits occur unless you're in an industry where audits are required. But where this will affect you is in trying to figure out who's got the software that shouldn't have it and who's not using the software. So in this report, I'm looking at number of installations, and I'm looking for applications that I have licenses for, and I'm not worried about anyone where the values come up as 0. So let's look at Reader really quickly. I have a license for Reader, but it's not installed anywhere, so it's an unused license. But down here, under Microsoft Server 2008, I have 3 installations of this, but only 1 license, which means I've got 2 machines that are unlicensed, and I can click here and see, okay, App 3 and my domain controller are not licensed for servers, so I need to rectify that. I need to get them licensed, or I need to get rid of those servers. And then I can go over and see what machine server is actually licensed on. So this is going to help me figure out, again, where I'm unlicensed and where I have the licenses, but also what's being unused. So I can look down here at Spotlight on Active Directory and click on Unused and see that I've got 1 license that has not been touched. And then I can either reduce the amount of licenses I have or move that license over to a user that actually needs it instead of having to buy an additional license. So this is really going to help me kind of manage that cost, manage all that software. And if my boss comes to me and says, hey, I'm being told that we need to buy 20 more licenses of Photoshop, you can very quickly run a report and tell them, well, we don't need to buy 20, we can buy 10 because we're over-licensed here, these people don't need the software, and these people aren't using the software. So it's going to help us out. That's pretty much what I want to cover in this aspect, and I think that pretty much covers our topic today. Is that right, Greg?
I think so. I mean, once people recognize that, this activity is difficult, because if you're trying to look at the windows, you're probably seeing how difficult it is, that there just are some of these activities that just don't work well with what you got right out of the box with the native tools.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people just don't worry about software license management. It's too hard to do, and in a lot of cases there aren't a lot of questions being asked. But right now, when we're dealing with times where we're pretty much in a recession, we're dealing with tightened budgets. Anywhere that you can identify savings is going to look good for you, whether you can reinvest that if it's part of the IT budget, or if you're giving money back to those departments, they're going to feel a lot better. And if it's an easier job for you to do that, then it just makes it a simpler case.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in number 4 also, but just I've talked to so many IT shops that are they're swimming in a sea of legacy stuff that really may or may not actually be used all that much. And without some sort of mechanism to bring some quantitative answers about how much people are actually using those things, it's very difficult for IT to just sort of stand up and say, we're getting rid of these things because no one's using them. But if they have if they have data that confirms that, it really kind of helps. So you can kind of get off of all that old stuff and start looking towards future stuff instead of spending all your time spinning on the old stuff.
Yep, absolutely, especially if you're still one of those businesses on XP that wants to move to 7 and some of those applications aren't compatible, or you have to build a standard image and you really don't want to include 50 of those applications if you don't have to, then you can use that data, as you said, and that's a really good point. So if you wanted to go check out Asset Manager, we have a 30-day evaluation that you can download for free. We also have an ROI calculator available on the product page that will let you enter in your software costs and potential over license, etc., and come up with an ROI that shows you how much money you could be saving just on over licensed and unused licenses, and it's pretty powerful. And you can go check that out on scriptlogic.com/asset manager. And if you wanted to reach out to Greg, you can find him on his website, www.concentratedtech.com. And then we also mentioned that we're giving out these links, and you saw those bit.ly links at the bottom of some of those slides. That's coming from our SMB IT Simplified website, which, as Greg mentioned, we've got these great IT experts, which Greg happens to be one of, just by coincidence, where they're creating these videos, these articles, these blog posts that help IT admins solve some of the problems that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. And again, it's vendor agnostic. It's not all about promoting ScriptLogic or Quest products. It's really using things like PowerShell, AppLocker, Windows 7 tools, etc., to accomplish your job. And you can go there, and there's constantly new content being posted. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can sign up for the newsletter and consume that material, that content, however you want to.